up, people? What's up? It's me, L Teddy 27 again. This is Angry Teacher Chronicles. This is a review for the Netflix limited series Killer Inside the Mind of Aaron Hernandez. And we're going to review all 3 episodes. There were 3 episodes. It's a Netflix limited series. It's all about former NFL player Aaron Hernandez and his life, his troubles with the law, his death, and everything in between. I do have a lot to say, but I'm not going to drag this video out. I'm definitely not going to give you a play-by-play of the series. I mean, you definitely need to watch it. So rather than this just being commentary or a recap, this is truly going to be an insight as to what I saw, and a review of what it is that I saw. You know, kind of when you think of commentary, you think of just a recap where you kind of do a play-by-play. But when you do a real review, you give insight where you kind of give, you know, more than just a play-by-play. So we're going to do a review here. Yeah. So I guess ain't nothing to it but to do it. So we start off with him going to jail. We start off at the beginning. They throw you right in the deep end. At the beginning, it started off with him being, you know, coming out of the house, being handcuffed, and then putting the t-shirt over him with his hands behind his back with the shorts on and everything and all of that. Everybody's familiar with that scene and what it looked like. That is an image that I think all of us can remember seeing. Couple things that stood out was they did what they normally do for a high-profile suspect such as him. They put him on immediate suicide watch because they figured that he would not adjust well. They didn't figure that he would do well in jail, because he wasn't in prison, he was in jail, which is an adjustment when you are someone of that type of means, of that high profile and status. And so they put him on suicide watch, but they remarked at how quickly he adjusted to life in jail. That wasn't that big of a deal to me. Like, I think that you kind of know if you're in jail, you got to kind of, you know, make the best of it. I'm sure they didn't really go into details about it, but I'm sure there were some accommodations that were probably made for him that were not being made for just Joe Blow, you and me, if we had went to jail. But that's a whole different story for a whole nother time. Anyway, so then they backtrack and they go back to his childhood to talk about how he grew up. And his dad is Puerto Rican. His mom is white. And his dad was a very stern, strict, strong disciplinarian. His dad played football as well. They lived in Bristol, Connecticut. They grew up in middle to upper middle class household. And keep that in mind. Aaron Hernandez did not grow up in the hood. Aaron Hernandez didn't grow up with a childhood where, you know, he was lacking or there was, no, that was not his story. He grew up in a very, you know, middle class to upper middle class area, went to that type of high school. And so for the most part, he doesn't have the story that you hear of the typical NFL player. The black NFL player, I should say, who talks about, you know, growing up poor, having to struggle, football being a means to escape um, the surroundings. That's not his story. Like I said, his dad played football. His older brother played football. And he, oh, you stupid piece of crap. Not now. Oh, sorry, y'all. Go off. Oh, you stupid piece of crap. This thing is just not working for me. You stupid piece of antiquated machinery, you. Sometimes my central AC wants to act up. Now, you see how it's acting up for the camera? You see what I'm saying? What up? You screw you. Screw you, central AC unit. Anyway. Right. Anyway, y'all. But, so he didn't come from that. But part of the story is the part of the story that he does have like a typical football player is with him being the star athlete on his high school team. Now, he grew up in Bristol, Connecticut, which is where the headquarters of ESPN are as well. That's a whole nother angle that we could take if we wanted to. He went to Bristol Bristol Central High School, and he was bigger than everyone, all of the other football players. He played tight end. He was faster. You know, he played multiple sports, track and field, basketball, football. He was that guy for that high school, and every high school had that guy who's a star player, star athlete. I remember in my high school, the guy who graduated with me at the time, who was our star athlete, was Najee Davenport. Najee was on the he wasn't on the basketball team, but Najee was on the football team and the track team, and Najee was our star running back. He went on to play with the University of Miami Hurricanes, won the championship with them, I believe. He then went on to play in the NFL for the Green Bay Packers and so forth. And then there was that alleged story with him, you know. If go Google Najee Davenport and you'll hear about that story in the closet with the laundry basket. Ooh. Funny story. Anyway, now I'm bringing up his childhood for this reason. If you know anything about athletes, star athletes, from a very early age, if they learn that if they can win games, that can afford them certain privileges. That can afford them the opportunity to get out of trouble. That can afford them the opportunity to always be giving the second, third, fourth chance to get a slap on the wrist or get no consequences at all. And when that becomes habitual and when that becomes chronic and repetitive, that individual that has what we like to call learned behavior, where it's embedded in them that they're always going to be able to get away with wrongdoing. So, and the same was to be said about him. The only person that made him accountable for what he did from everything that you can see, from the people that I've been able to speak to, and I have spoken with some people who I am going to remain, let them keep their anonymity after speaking with them. But I have spoken with some people who, one person who knew him from high school, another person who knew him when he was at University of Florida, and I spoke with another person that knew him when he was in the NFL. And all of these people are friends of mine. I trust them, but they don't have no reason to lie to me. But anyway, the only person that made him accountable as a child growing up was his father, who was that staunch disciplinarian, who was hard on him, who is, you know, that guy, you know. And he feared his father. A couple things that come out of that, out of his childhood, is the fact that there's this guy named Dennis who's his quarterback. He's the tight end on the team, and Dennis is the quarterback. Ironically enough, his older brother's name is Dennis as well. His older brother also played quarterback. But the guy, Dennis Sansucci, who's his starting quarterback, they had an interesting relationship. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. But Aaron was born, I don't want to say born into privilege, but he certainly wasn't born with the story that you hear often. We got to keep in mind the dad. The dad was the one who kept him in line. He feared his dad. The dad was the only one that made him accountable, and that's going to play a part a little bit later. So when they do this documentary, you see this back and forth. They'll give you snippets, and they'll give you footage and things from the trial, and then they'll go back to a previous period in his life. Then they'll give you another image from his or video from his trial. Then they'll go back to another period of life. So there was this back and forth dance with that, which makes it hard to do a review for it. But I can navigate through these things. So one of the people who we learned from the trial, and this is the Odin Lloyd trial, the first trial that he was convicted, where he got convicted. We see his cousin, Tanya Singleton, and the cousin, she was loyal to a fault. She had breast cancer. She has 2 boys, and when it came time for them to try to make her testify against him, she refused. She would not testify against him. She was loyal to him. She was ride or die, and she stuck out to me because you could tell over the course of, and they would be constantly playing these phone conversations that he was having with different individuals, and it seems like there was this cry for someone to always, he was looking or yearning for someone to be there for him, to have his back, to be his backbone, to be there to support him in this time where he felt that he did not have support from everybody in the world. And that was funny, not funny I should say, but it was ironic that someone who, when you looked at him during the initial trial, he always had this look of, he was just this stoic pillar, no motion, emotionless. He seemed like someone so, strong and so sturdy and stable. But when you hear him on these phone conversations, there's a stark contrast, because you could hear him even in some of the casual conversation. He's literally, even when it was just casual conversation, I just always picked up on, he's looking for support. He's looking for someone to have his back and hold him up and hold him down. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, they only played maybe 1 or 2 phone conversations with this cousin, Tanya, whereas the girlfriend, they played a whole bunch of stuff, at least a dozen or more phone conversations from her. The mom, just about the same amount. You heard ones from his agent. You heard ones with him and lawyers. But I only think I remember them playing 1 or 2 conversations with him and this Tanya Singleton person. And the Tanya Singleton person, of everybody, with the exception of perhaps his fiance or girlfriend, had his back the most. And I say even more than the fiance girlfriend, because she said, I ain't saying nothing. I know a lot. I ain't telling y'all nothing. If I got to go to jail, I got to go to jail. But I am not telling y'all anything. And she was ride or die. So, another individual, another relationship that that unnerved me in this thing was the relationship between Shayana Jenkins and Shania Jenkins. These were sisters. And Shayana Jenkins was the fiance of Aaron Hernandez. Shania Jenkins was the girlfriend of Odin Odin Lloyd, who Aaron Hernandez was convicted of murdering. And Aaron Hernandez met Odin Loyal. I keep wanting to say Loyal. Odin Lloyd because through Cheyenne, because that was her sister's boyfriend. At this trial, and in the aftermath of Odin Lloyd's death, this broke up the relationship between the two sisters. I mean, Cheyenne Jenkins stood by Aaron Hernandez just about as much as the Tanya Singleton. Only difference is Cheyenne still testified at the trial. Tanya Singleton wasn't here for it. But anyway, she abandoned her sister, and you could tell that this hurt her sister Shania. The fact that there was all of this evidence, and there was everything that basically said that Aaron Hernandez killed and murdered Shania's boyfriend, and rather than Cheyenne be there to support and stand by her sister, she stood by Aaron Hernandez. And she had Aaron Hernandez back. Her oath of fealty was to Aaron Hernandez. And I found that striking. I thought to myself, okay, was she that deeply in love, or what? I mean, what kind of bond did her and Aaron have where she's willing to sever ties with her blood sister, who, for all that was said by, the sister and things, they had a extremely close relationship prior to this. Now, Cheyenne has known Aaron Hernandez since they were in like middle school or something like that. But still, she was very willing and did sever ties with her own blood sister to be there for Aaron Hernandez. And that stuck out to me. Then we got to this relationship between Aaron and the quarterback of his high school football team, who is Dennis Sansucci, who I told you about. Dennis Sansucci talked about them having sex. Aaron Hernandez and Dennis having sex. Dennis said that it possibly was a relationship, but which means that it was something where they were really close friends who were also having sex, which is a relationship, but there was nothing officially where it was like, oh, we're in this relationship, we're boyfriends. They were boys that were very close friends that also had sex, and the sex was involved in it. Now, I don't know the depth or degree to which the sex was involved. I don't know all of that. He did not go into those gory details, but he did talk about it. He talked about this went on from 7th grade all the way until their junior year in high school. And it's interesting because their junior year in high school is when Aaron decided, Aaron started going with Cheyenne, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's when they started dating. I could be wrong. But Aaron definitely was having relations with this guy, according to him. Now, this is the only person we have to go by with this is this guy. The interesting thing about it is it was Aaron's death that made and the stories that started to come out in the aftermath of Aaron's death that made this guy come out of the closet to his own father. So that's a whole thing to unpack in itself, which we probably won't be able to get to. Now, both this quarterback, Dennis Sansucci's father, was very homophobic, just like Dennis Hernandez. Dennis Hernandez is Aaron's father, and Dennis Hernandez was very homophobic. He was, I told you, he was that kind of a father. And so it certainly was going to be frowned upon. If not, there were going to be harsh consequences for that being brought to light. So that it was kept very quiet. Go into the fact that Aaron's dad died, and when he was 16, and that's what happened. It wasn't that he started dating the girl Cheyenne. His dad died um, right before his junior year, and he was 16 years old. And he was 16 years old, and that was a life-changing experience for him, because remember, I told you the dad was the only check and balance that you had to keep him in line. Remember, he was a star athlete. He was a child of privilege. So what that meant is he outside of his dad, nobody was checking him. If he did something wrong, the coaches, the administration, his fellow students, everybody made accommodations for him. Everybody made excuses for him. Everybody made things go away, and everybody made it where he could continue to do whatever he wanted to, except his dad, who made him accountable. And once his dad died, his mom, you could tell, could not control him. His mom could not control him. And he started hanging over at his cousin Tanya Singleton's house. Now, Tanya Singleton was the one who did not grow up in the middle class, upper middle class. Tanya Singleton grew up in the more impoverished areas. Tanya Singleton had people that were from the hood, the drug game, and all of that stuff that was in and out of her house. And when he started to be at her house more often, because his dad died, that changed his trajectory. The reason he started going over there was his mom started having a relationship with his cousin Tanya's husband. His mom started up a relationship just a couple months after his dad died with his cousin Tanya's husband. And so Aaron, not wanting to be in that and around that, and still probably grieving and mourning the loss of somebody who was that big of a figure in his life, chose to just go over there and be away from his home with his mom. So that is where his trajectory changed in his life. And he began to be exposed to things that he did not know anything of. And when you and this is what I want to say about this, and this was toward the end of the second episode. The thing about it is that when you are someone who comes from privilege, you're not from that life, and you come and you become exposed to people from that life, from the drug game, from the gang life, from all of that stuff, and you come into that late in life, knowing that people know you don't come from that, what happens is that person ends up trying to overcompensate. They try to prove that they are that much more gangster, or that much more thug, or that much more hood, or that much more menacing than the people who actually come from that life. And so you could see that that's what Aaron, when he began to be exposed to these to this life, I could see that that's probably what began to happen there. So then when the case came out about Aaron Hernandez, and they found this body of Odin Lloyd, because Aaron Hernandez was this star player for the New England Patriots. This is in Boston. The police didn't want to believe it. They didn't want to believe it. They did not want to believe it. They refused. They just did, and it goes back to that privilege that athletes seem to have. People want to make exceptions for them. People want to give them a pass, turn a blind eye, and it was the same case with the police here. At first, they didn't want to believe it, but and then you start to hear them talking about how, oh, once we connected him to the murder case, all these stories started coming out, and all of this evidence was right in front of us after we connected him, pinned him to the murder. No, they were always there. You just wanted to and chose to ignore them because of who he was. The typical story of an athlete. I mean, it was all right in front of them. They just did not want to believe it. And that is a story that's been played out millions of times with star athletes. And I'm not here to castigate or come down on star athletes, but having been around them, having a lot of history with that, it happens. That's what happened. It does. I mean, it's about money. They're making a lot of money for a lot of people. So this becomes very important. So I saw it also when they were showing the trial. It was so interesting to see this cousin Tanya Singleton. She seemed to be, the more the trial progressed, the more her health seemed to diminish and go down. And baby, she was still here for it. She was ride or die. She was unwavering in her support of her cousin, and that was a sight to see through the injuries and all. So then when we get to episode 2, they start to talk about him in his years at the University of Florida. He initially was supposed to go to UConn, where his older brother already was in school, and he was going to play on the team with his older brother. But when his dad died, and he began to hang out at his cousin Tanya's house and become exposed to this newfound freedom that he didn't have at his own home or under the subjection of his father, he wanted to get away. And he wanted to be as far away as he can to sow his wild oats and do all of the stuff that he really was not allowed to do. So he goes to a school like University of Florida, and if you know, and this is where I had extensive talk with a couple friends of mine who were in school with Aaron Hernandez at the time, who were friends of Aaron Hernandez, who were close to him at that time. If you know the atmosphere of the University of Florida football team, Urban Meyer tried to portray this persona that this team was, that he was this God-fearing guy and they would be over his house, praying and this, that, and the third. But what Urban Meyer, fails to tell you is the inmates were running the asylum. It was all smoke and mirrors. What it was is he was putting this cloak up so that you couldn't see all of the fuckery that was going on at that school. The football team were running wild. Now, I don't want to make it like this was an anomaly or this is something that doesn't normally happen. You got a big-time school that's winning big-time championships and making big-time monies for a school. Blind eyes are going to be turned, okay? People in positions of power that try to call out things that are going on are going to be told, no, you're not going to do that. You want to know why you're not going to do that? Because we need this person on the field. Because if they don't go on the field and play, they're not going to, we're going to lose out. We're going to lose a couple games, which could then turn to us losing money. And there are millions and billions of dollars in college football games. You got to think about many of the colleges and universities where it's a big time school is not in a big city. It's usually in a small city or a small town where that school is the center of that town. Everything revolves around that town. I know I went to Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida. And Tallahassee's kind of bigger now, but when I went to school at Florida State, football was king. Florida State was life. When the football team played, the entire city shut down. Virtually. I mean, pretty much everything shut down when the game was on. Nothing moved. Everything in that town, city, centered around that school. And it's the same thing in Gainesville. Without the University of Florida, Gainesville is a swamp. Literally. And so, you have years with Urban Meyer, and you got Urban Meyer and Tim Tebow, who's these God-fearing white boys that are here, and they are America's, that's what America wants to see, the Urban Meyers and Tim Tebows on the way. not on the way, but in front of the screen. Couple that with what was really going on. Most of the players, the reason that they had Tim Tebow in front of the screen all the time, because you didn't want to see the other players there. You had the Pouncey twins, Mike and Marquise Pouncey, that were doing way worse stuff than Aaron Hernandez. And Aaron Hernandez was doing awful things. And there's a cast of other players that we can call out from that team that were doing deplorable things. Real crimes were being committed, and real crimes were being swept under the rug and a blind eye turned to. A good friend of mine is a police officer for the University of Florida, and he shall remain nameless, but he told me, we talked earlier today about what that time was like, and he said, yeah, we were told, if so-and-so comes in here, you call this coach, you call that coach, and if it's this list of players, this list of 8, you call Urban Meyer. They will come here, they will take care of it, and we will not do, and nothing will be said of it. I'm telling you. So this is what Aaron Hernandez had at such a young age. He went to college at 17, okay? At such a young age, he was, once again, the privilege was allowing him to be able to do what he wanted to do, say what he wanted to say, get away with all kinds of stuff. And it's now becoming embedded in him and learned behavior. And it's something you see all the time. So much so when they take you back to the murder scene, they talk about how sloppy the murder was, how all of this evidence was left there, how all of these things that a normal, hardened criminal that knows that life and knows that they need to cover up their tracks would do. Not so much Aaron Hernandez. Aaron Hernandez said, I don't care. I'm Aaron Hernandez. I done got away with stuff all this time. I'm going to get away with it this time. Do you know who the hell I am? And that's how he felt. You then start to hear stories about him doing things at Florida, like when he punched the manager of this bar in the ear and bust his eardrum simply because the manager said, hey, you ran up this tab, are you going to pay your tab? And he punched the guy in the side of the head and bust his eardrum. Mind you, that guy ended up, they said, not pressing charges. But when you are running a bar in Gainesville, right on, basically on the grounds of, right outside the grounds of the university called the Swamp, you pretty much got to go with what the football team wants you to do. And they tell you in very demonstrative terms that you do that. So these are real things that happen. You would be surprised. So somebody said something in the documentary that I wrote down because it rings so true in this case. They said the more you get away with shit, the more you feel untouchable. And I'm sure that's how he felt. The coaches and the staff, you know, they allowed this thing. I'm not going to say they encouraged it, but by not holding them accountable, they kind of did. After that, we have him getting drafted at the age of 20 to the NFL. He was a 4th round draft pick. Now, Boston was the worst place for him to go. New England was the worst place for him to go. Why? Because that's home for him. He's from Bristol, Connecticut. Massachusetts is right there. So going to New England is the worst place in the world. This is home territory. What you want for somebody with that kind of history is to be far away from home, where they don't have good footing, where maybe they have to learn new people and new things, and it doesn't allow them to get right back into the game. But it was a perfect storm for him, I would say. Him getting drafted to the Patriots was the perfect storm, because you knew the Patriots were going to be able to cover up some things, like University of Florida were going to be able to cover up some things. But what made the Patriots more dangerous than University of Florida is the Patriots were still up there in New England, where he's from. So that was a recipe for disaster. There's then talk about CTE, and they start to introduce that into the conversation. The fact, the Junior Seau's of the world and all of these players that suffer from CTE. CTE is an issue and it is a concern with regard to Aaron Hernandez, but it's not the issue or concern. It's one of the pieces of the puzzle, but it's not the main piece of the puzzle. And I just wanted to say that. I felt like when they started to describe him in his early years in the NFL, and he would go to these clubs and hang out, he always, people were starting to say that he felt like people thought he was soft, or that he didn't think he was hard enough. And that goes back to what I was saying to you all earlier, overcompensating for, not being from that life. Then they learned that he's probably responsible for a double murder that supposedly happened before Odin Lloyd's murder, where these guys, they said, were at the club. Some guy wasted a drink on him by mistake. He followed them after the club. They stop at a light, and he shoots them in cold blood in the middle of the street. They found the SUV at his cousin Tanya Singleton's house. It had not been driven since the dudes were killed, and all of this circumstantial evidence that they're now finding now, when it was there the whole time, they just didn't want to believe it was Aaron Hernandez. All of these surveillance tapes that are magically popping up now, but they were always there. Anyway, and then we hear about this friend Alexander Bradley, who was this big time drug dealer, this gangster, and so forth and so on. They take this trip down to Miami. Alex was in the car with him when he shot allegedly shot the two guys in the middle of the street. And they go to Tootsie's. Shouts out to Tootsie's in Miami. I go to Tootsie's all the time in Miami. Great food. If you ever go to Miami, you got to go to Tootsie's. Get the fried lobster or the seafood platter. Great food down at Tootsie's. Great food. Good drinks too. Great food, great drinks. Anyway, he said something. Alex said something to Aaron, because Aaron thought he saw some guys that could be the police. And Alex says to him, well, if you wouldn't have did that stupid thing, meaning shooting the two guys, you wouldn't have to be worried about nothing. And Alex claims that Aaron took offense to this. Aaron, they was riding back to, I guess, to their hotel or whatever. Aaron saw him in the middle. Aaron stopped. Alex went to sleep. Aaron stops them. They get out the car, and Aaron shoots Alex in the head, in the face. I'm guessing he thought that he had killed him. And the guy ended up living and surviving. And he refuses to tell the police it's Aaron, because he wants to seek his own revenge on Aaron. Aaron at this point becomes afraid, because he knows Alex has the means by which to kill him. He's about that life. He's from that life where Aaron is not. So he's afraid and concerned for his safety. So he goes to the Patriots and tells them that. And the Patriots do like I told you, the same story. What do? They appease him. They try to do everything they can to make life easier for him. They buy him. They get him his own apartment. So now he not only has his mansion, but he has this secret apartment where he can go and do all of the nefarious things that he ever thought he wanted to do. It's the same thing over and over and over. Everybody's accommodating this horrible person. Everyone. Because he's an athlete. And we see this story played out thousands and thousands of times. Robert Kraft, they go back to the case. And the one time, Aaron Hernandez was stoic. He didn't move. He didn't budge. He showed no facial expression. The only time you saw Aaron Hernandez shook was when Robert Kraft came. And it goes back to where he always felt that, okay, football is going to be a cover for me. I'm going to be saved because I'm a football player, because I'm this star athlete, and my connection to the New England Patriots is going to save me. This jury isn't going to convict me. That's going to get me over. And I think when he found out Robert Kraft was coming to testify against him, he knew, oh, I can't use me being an athlete as a crutch. Now, what had become learned behavior, sports always being able to bail me out, was probably what was going to put the nail in the coffin for me. And I think that's why the people that were talking about it kept saying that was the one time they kept seeing him look back to see, Robert Kraft. So, they show videos on the closing arguments. They showed a video of Aaron and the guys that killed him, that helped him to commit the crime. After the day after, because Aaron's defense tried to say that Aaron didn't do this. Aaron was just there, and the other two guys did it, and they were these horrible murderers, and Aaron just was there as they killed his friend. But they show Aaron the day afterwards with the two guys in his house with his daughter, him letting the daughters play with the guys and everything. So it was a mess. It was a mess. The one thing, after Aaron was convicted, you saw Aaron get convicted. Once again, he was stoic, no emotions, no nothing, just went in the jail. There was a conversation they played with Cheyenne Jenkins, his fiance, and him afterwards. And she humanized him for me. Whereas in the court, he had this menacing look all of the time that it made him, to me, look more menacing, that he didn't show emotion. But on the phone with her, you just heard her telling him, no matter what they say, I still love you and I'm still here for you. And she was crying. And it wasn't that she was crying that made me feel the way that I did. It was the fact that I went back to thinking that, yes, he is a horrible person for doing this, but he's still a human being. And it brought me back to, this isn't just a monster. This is an actual human being. And I was like, wow. Like, she really brought that back home to me, and she humanized him for me after the conviction of Odin Lloyd. Then there was the whole thing. There was the second trial where he got off because they said that they tried to put it on Alex Bradley, saying that it was Alex Bradley who did it and not Aaron. And Aaron got off. Aaron got off on that, meaning he was acquitted of that trial. And like 2 days later is when he commits suicide. And that's where it goes into the fact that Massachusetts has this law of abatement, meaning if you die while your trial is in appeals process, they remove your conviction. So the judge had no choice. The law was she had to remove the conviction of Odin Lloyd's death. And Odin Lloyd's mom, I if you notice, I haven't talked about her because she's the one person, when I watched this documentary, she's the one person who my whole heart melted. Every time she came on camera, my heart literally like sunk in. And I don't want to go into that whole emotional thing, because even just thinking about her makes me take pause, because she was, ooh, that lady went through a lot after the death of her son. So he was acquitted on that. He committed suicide 2 days later, which some people said was because he wanted to ensure that his fiance and his daughter got to keep his money by having because if the conviction was removed, he could possibly keep his $40 million contract. After he died is when all of the stories started to surface about him being a homosexual. I can tell you, there are a lot of documented stories from when he was in high school, and you heard me talk about the Dennis and Susie story, several from when he was in college, several from in the NFL, documented. And then there's the guy who was in jail with him, who had letters and things love letters between him and Aaron. Whether or not he was fully gay, bisexual, or whatever you want to call it, pansexual, whatever you want to call him, there was something there. The problem is the agent by which this came out is the wrong one, because there was this lady reporter, I can't remember her name. She went on this radio broadcast, and the way she tried to put his business out there was despicable. It was horrible, and it messed everything up. It made it where people didn't want to believe that Aaron might have been gay or bisexual when he probably was. And then it highlighted another part that we'll get into in a second. So she went on this radio broadcast and she started calling. She said she started using just deplorable terms like, well, he had always been a tight end. And the radio personality is like, yeah, and he was a tight end and got turned into a wide receiver. It was just awful and deplorable and despicable. Anyway, they talked about that. There was this whole thing about um, whether or not Aaron was gay. They talked about his brother talked about the fact that he might have been sexually abused as a child, and they tried to introduce that narrative. And I'm not saying that that didn't happen. I'm not saying that did happen, but I just hate when people always try to make it where, in order for somebody like an Aaron Hernandez or somebody who doesn't present themselves to be the typical or stereotypical gay person, that in order for them to be gay, they had to have been molested as a child because they couldn't want to do that normally or naturally. And that can't be further from the truth. And I hate when that narrative is introduced. And I think had this lady, this sports journalist not tried to put this information out there on this radio program in such a despicable manner, it might not have taken that road. Maybe it would have anyway, but I just think it introduced so much into it, and I really don't want to unpack that part of it because that's a whole nother hour of talking that I don't want to do, and it's going to take me some places that's going to get me really, really angry and upset and heated, and I don't want to go down that road. But that was a narrative that was pushed. I really intended, before I saw the documentary, to really talk about this portion, but after what I saw, I don't want to. The last thing they brought up was the CTE, and they talked about, they had the specialists and the experts come on and talk about the fact that his brain was way more advanced in terms of CTE than a normal 27-year-old would have been. I'm not saying that that's not the case, but like I said earlier, CTE was a factor, but it wasn't the factor in causing Aaron Hernandez to do what he did. Am I sympathetic to Aaron Hernandez? No, not at all. I think that Aaron Hernandez is the story of a lot. The story of Aaron Hernandez is the story of a lot of athletes. A lot of them. They don't necessarily go to the extreme of Aaron Hernandez, but they certainly do a whole lot of things that normal people would not be able to do and get away with. It amazes me that people found it so fascinating that this could happen. I didn't find it that fascinating that this could happen. I was like, seems very plausible. Um, in terms of the production value of this, I think that on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give this a 6 in terms of the documentary itself. There were a lot of things that I wish that they had done more of. I wanted to know more about And we got some of it during the phone conversations, but I wanted to know more about the relationship between him and Cheyenne. And I wanted to know more about the relationship between Cheyenne and her sister, because that seemed to intrigue me. They did talk some about the relationship between Aaron and his mom and their estranged relationship, but not as much as I would have liked them to. Because I think more time should have been spent on that time when his father died, and the fact that his mom went and started a relationship with his cousin's husband. I think that was the pivotal moment when things changed and his trajectory changed. And I don't think they spent enough time on that. I also don't think they spent enough time on on his UF years, his years at University of Florida, which I think were more responsible for shaping what Aaron did when he went to the not University of Patriots, but to New England Patriots. That I think they should have spent more time on. But I know they probably didn't, because the NCAA didn't want them to do that. University of Florida didn't want them to do that. And that's a whole lot of money that they didn't want. That's a whole lot that they didn't want to get into. Y'all let me know what y'all think. If you watched it, put your comments in the comment section. Let me know what you think. I know this was a long video, but it was just a lot to unpack. And I didn't even unpack a tenth of everything that I wanted to unpack. But we can get to it in the comment section. Let's get down in the comments and argue about what we saw. That was the limited series on Netflix, Killer Inside the Mind of Aaron Hernandez. Y'all let me know what y'all think. Until next time, I'm L Teddy 27. Thank y'all for coming. Y'all drive safely.